$2, Caleb Marsh said, and not a cent more for a person. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, uncertain. Behind him, on the raised platform of rough pine boards, stood a woman with her wrists bound in rope too thin for the crime she'd been accused of. Existing, mostly, in a town that had decided to hate her before it ever learned her name. The crowd in Piedrasica had gathered the way crowds gather for hangings, though this was, technically, only a dead auction. Sheriff Otis Dunmore stood at the platform's edge with his thumbs hooked in his belt, smiling the way men smile when they've already won something and are only waiting for the rest of the world to notice. She burned the Halloran barn, someone shouted from the back, though no one had proven it, and the fire had started, everyone privately knew, from a lightning strike in a summer so dry the whole valley seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to combust. Cursed, an old woman muttered, crossing herself. Drought came the week she arrived. Fire came the month after. The woman on the platform did not flinch at the word. She had heard it so many times it no longer landed like an insult. More like weather, something that happened to her rather than because of her. Her name was Nahito, though the town had stopped trying to pronounce it correctly sometime around her second week, and now called her nothing at all or worse. She kept her chin level and her eyes on the horizon beyond the buyers' hats, the way her mother had taught her to do when men wanted to see you break and you intended to disappoint them. Caleb had ridden into town for horseshoe nails. He had not intended to buy a person's freedom with the coins meant for his blacksmith shop. But he had watched Dunmore's men drag her up onto that platform with the casual cruelty of men handling livestock, and something in his chest, some old, half-buried thing from the war, from watching men treat other men as less than men, had stood up inside him and refused to sit back down. $2 is an insult, boy, Dunmore said, stepping closer, close enough that Caleb could smell the whiskey riding under his words. Girl's debt runs to 40. Her father's land, the taxes on it, the taxes you invented, Caleb said quietly, on land you wanted. The square went still in the particular way a room goes still when someone has said a true thing out loud that everyone already knew and had agreed, silently, never to say. Dunmore's smile thinned. You calling me a liar, Marsh? I'm calling you a man who's about to sell a debt for less than it's worth, Caleb said, because if you push this further, I'll ask the circuit judge next month why a dead man's land taxes tripled the week after he died. It was a bluff. Caleb did not know the tax records, but he had learned, from 4 years of war and 4 more of rebuilding, that certainty was often just fear wearing a better coat, and that men like Dunmore backed down faster from confidence than from truth. The auctioneer, sensing the crowd's attention shifting from spectacle to scandal, banged his gavel before Dunmore could answer. Sold. $2 to the Marsh boy. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, some scandalized, some merely hungry for a new rumor to chew on through winter. Nahito did not move. Her eyes found Caleb's for the first time, and in them he saw something he had not expected. Not gratitude, not relief, but a fierce, wary calculation. The look of a woman deciding whether her cage had simply changed hands. You don't own me, she said, when he cut the rope from her wrists. Her voice was low, steady, carrying no plea in it at all. Whatever you paid for. I didn't buy you, Caleb said. I bought the paper. There's a difference, and I intend to prove it. She studied him for a long moment, the scar along his jaw, the ash still ground into the creases of his blacksmith's hands, the way he would not quite meet her eyes, as though shame lived closer to the surface in him than pride did. Prove it, then, she said. Walk away first. See if I follow. He hesitated only a heartbeat before he turned and walked toward his wagon, leaving her free to do as she pleased in the middle of the square, in front of 100 watching eyes that expected her to run, or to be dragged, or to disappear the way inconvenient women sometimes did in towns like this one. Instead, after a long moment, he heard her boots on the packed dirt behind him. Behind them both, Dunmore watched with the stillness of a man recalculating a debt he had not finished collecting. and in his coat pocket, folded twice and stained at the corner with old blood, was a second set of land papers he had not yet dared to burn. The ride to Caleb's ranch took 2 hours through country gone the color of old bone, and neither of them spoke for the first one. "You'll want the barn cleared of anything sharp," she finally said, breaking the silence with something so practical it startled him. "If you mean to put me there." "I mean to put you nowhere," Caleb said. "There's a room off the kitchen. Was my sister's, before she married and left for Sacramento. It has a door that locks from the inside, not the out." Nahito turned that over in her mind the way she turned over most things men said to her, waiting for the second half of the sentence, the condition, the price. It did not come. "Why?" she asked. "Did you do it?" "Because someone had to." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got." She was quiet again, watching the land roll past, scrubland cracked from months without rain, cattle standing thin-ribbed near a stock pond gone to mud. She recognized the signs of a ranch one bad season from ruin, and understood, with a clarity that made her jaw tighten, that Caleb had spent $2 he likely could not spare on a debt he had no obligation to settle. "Your neighbors will hate you for this," she said. "They mostly hate me already. I don't sell my beef through Dunmore's cooperative. Man's been trying to squeeze me off my water rights for 2 years. Then you didn't free me," she said, something sharpening in her voice. "You used me to spite him." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. It was the fairest accusation anyone had leveled at him all year, and it cut because some small, dishonest part of him could not entirely deny it. "Maybe there's truth in that," he admitted, "but it doesn't undo the freeing. A man can do the right thing for a tangled reason. Doesn't make the thing less right." She did not answer, but something in her shoulders eased, fractionally, the way a held breath eases without quite becoming a sigh. At the ranch, he showed her the room, the well, the kitchen, speaking each direction plainly, without the softened, careful tone men used when they wanted something from a woman and were pretending otherwise. She noted this, filed it away, said nothing. That evening, working alone to relieve a full wound tangled in barbed wire, Caleb swore under his breath and pressed his palm hard against a gash that would not stop bleeding. "Move," Nahito said, appearing in the barn doorway with a bundle of yarrow and a clean cloth she'd found in the kitchen. "You're doing it wrong. You know healing? My mother did. I watched." She knelt beside the trembling foal, her hands sure and unhurried, packing the wound with a competence that made Caleb sit back on his heels and simply watch. "Your neighbors call me cursed for bringing drought. If I could summon weather, don't you think I'd have summoned rain for myself first?" It was the closest thing to a joke she had offered him, dry and bladed, and he laughed despite himself. A short, surprised sound that seemed to unlock something in the barn's quiet air. "They're afraid," he said. "Fear needs somewhere to point itself. You were standing in the wrong square on the wrong day." "Convenient," she said, "for the men actually responsible." He did not ask her what she meant by that, not yet, but he noted the flicker in her eyes when she said responsible, a private knowledge she was not ready to hand him. 3 days later, riders came up the west road at dusk. Not fast, not slow, the pace of men who wanted their arrival noticed and feared in equal measure. Caleb counted 4, Dunmore among them, sitting his horse with the loose, proprietary ease of a man who believed the world still owed him something. "Evening, Marsh," Dunmore called from the yard's edge, not dismounting. "Come to check on my property." "She's not your property," Caleb said, stepping between the riders and the house, "and hasn't been since the gavel fell." "Debts have interest," Dunmore said, smiling, "and I've had time to think on how much this one's grown." Behind the curtained window, Nahito watched the exchange with her hand resting unconsciously on the small carved token her mother had left her, the only thing of home she had managed to keep, and understood, with the cold certainty of someone who had survived worse men than this, that the quiet at Caleb's ranch had only ever been borrowed time. The dust came first, a low brown curtain rising off the west road 2 mornings later, visible from the ranch house a full 10 minutes before the riders themselves. "Get inside," Caleb said, already reaching for the rifle above the door. No. Nahito's voice was flat, immovable. "I've run from men like this before. Running is how they win." He didn't argue further. There wasn't time. Dunmore's riders came in fast now, no pretense of a social call, hooves throwing up clods of dry earth, and behind Dunmore rode a man Caleb didn't recognize. Lean, gray-coated, with the unhurried stillness of someone paid to finish things quietly. "That's Silas Croft," Nahito said under her breath, and for the first time since the auction block, Caleb heard something crack through her composure. "He worked for the land office. He's the one who forged my father's tax debt." "You're certain?" "I watched him write it. I couldn't read English then. I can now." Her hand closed around the carved token at her throat. "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to believe me." The riders reined up 30 feet out. Dunmore didn't dismount. "This doesn't need to turn ugly, Marsh. Hand over the girl and the debt paper you think you settled, and we ride on." "The debt's settled." Judge Ferris confirmed the sale 2 days past. It was true. Caleb had ridden the 8 miles to town himself to make certain of it, quietly, before Dunmore could think to contest it in some backroom. Croft's horse shifted. "There's a second matter," he said, voice mild as creek water. "Matter of a dead rancher's land title, and a witness who watched it get altered." "So this was never about the debt," Caleb said slowly, understanding breaking over him like cold water. "It was about silencing her. It's about a man protecting his interests," Dunmore said, and the pleasantness dropped from his voice like a mask sliding. "Interests you've made considerably harder to protect." What happened next unspooled in the space of maybe 90 seconds, though it would live far longer than that in Caleb's memory. Croft's hand moving toward his coat, Caleb's rifle already rising, Nahito. Not fleeing, not screaming, but stepping forward with the small belt knife she'd hidden since the auction and driving it through the cinched strap of Croft's saddle in one motion so fast it seemed less like violence than instinct. The saddle slid. Croft's shot went wide, splintering the porch post beside Caleb's shoulder instead of finding flesh. Caleb's return shot took the pistol clean out of Croft's hand as the man scrambled up from the dirt, and for one suspended moment the whole yard held its breath. Dunmore frozen between drawing and fleeing, his remaining riders exchanging glances that suggested this had gone well past what they'd been paid for. "Enough," Nahito said, and her voice carried across the yard with a clarity that stopped even Dunmore's hand. She held up the knife, and in her other fist, retrieved from beneath her dress where she'd kept it hidden every day since her father's death, a folded, water-stained document. "This is the original title. Your man forgot I can read now, Sheriff. I copied the true numbers before he burned the first paper." Dunmore's face went the color of ash. "You'll want to consider," Caleb said, rifle steady, "whether killing us both in front of witnesses is a smaller problem than a judge seeing that paper." For a long, breath-held moment, no one moved. Then Dunmore, calculating faster than his pride wanted to allow, wheeled his horse. "This isn't finished," he said, the words of a man who already knew, somewhere beneath the bluster, that it very nearly was. They rode out the way they'd come, dust rising and settling behind them like a curtain falling on an act no one had wanted to watch. Nahito's hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. Not from fear, Caleb understood, but from 2 years of held breath finally, violently released. "You had that paper this whole time," he said quietly. "I was waiting," she said, "for someone worth trusting with it." That night, Caleb cleaned a shallow graze along his ribs where Croft's wild shot had caught splinters from the porch post, and Nahito, without asking, took the needle from his shaking hands. "You'll do it crooked," she said. "Sit still." He sat. The lamp between them threw gold light across the kitchen table, catching the fine, sure movements of her hands as she worked, and for a while the only sounds were the hiss of the wick and his own breath, carefully even, as though stillness were the only gift he had left to offer her. Why didn't you show the paper sooner? He asked finally. To the judge, to anyone? Who would believe a cursed woman over the sheriff's word? Her voice held no self-pity, only the flat accounting of someone who had already run the numbers and found them wanting. I needed a man the town half-trusted to stand beside me first. I'm not proud of using you that way, but I've stopped apologizing for surviving. You don't owe me an apology for surviving, Caleb said. I'd have done worse in your place. She tied off the stitch and sat back, studying him in the lamplight the way she had studied him on the auction platform. Assessing, careful but softer now at the edges. My mother used to say a wound that scars means the body chose to live rather than to die quietly. I think of that every time someone calls me cursed. Scars mean it lived. He turned the token at her throat over in his gaze. A small carved bird, wings half spread, worn smooth from years of handling. What is it? My mother's. A wren. She said wrens build in the burned places first, before anything else dares to. She used to say our family did the same. Nahito's fingers closed around it, and for the first time, Caleb watched something old and grieved move openly across her face. She died the winter after my father. Fever, not curse, though the town preferred the second story. I lost my own family young, Caleb said quietly. Not to fever. To a war I spent 4 years pretending had a point. I came home and put myself into this forge because it was the only work that let me hit something without hurting anyone. And now I think I've been hitting iron long enough to know the difference between shaping something and breaking it. He met her eyes, steady this time, no longer looking away. I don't want to shape you into gratitude, Nahito. I want you to stay because staying is what you choose, not what you owe. She was quiet a long moment, turning the wren between her fingers. Dunmore won't stop. Not until that paper is in a judge's hands, or I'm in the ground. Then we ride for the circuit judge at first light. Together, she repeated, testing the word the way she'd tested every word the strange, stubborn man had offered her since the auction block, and found, for the first time in 2 years, that it did not feel like a cage closing, but like a door swinging open onto whether she might actually choose to stand in. Outside, wind moved through the dry grass with a low, steady hush, and somewhere past the ridge, heat lightning flickered without thunder. The sky's own quiet warning that the storm, when it broke, was not yet finished breaking. They reached the circuit judge's chambers in Piedrasica by mid-morning, the folded, water-stained title paper carried inside Nahito's coat like something sacred. Dunmore was waiting on the courthouse steps, as though he'd known they would come. And perhaps he had, Caleb thought, because cornered men rarely run twice from the same fight without first trying to finish it their own way. Judge won't take the word of a, Dunmore started, but the courthouse door was already open, and Judge Ferris himself stood in the frame, flanked by a clerk with a ledger, having ridden in the previous evening for a separate land dispute that, as it happened, touched several of the same falsified deeds. I'll take the word of a document, Otis, the judge said dryly, provided it holds up against the county's own filed copy, which, conveniently, I had a writer fetch from the Territorial Archive last week, after 3 other ranchers came to me with complaints about your tax assessments. Dunmore's face went through several colors in quick succession. Bluster, calculation, and finally, as Croft was dragged forward by 2 deputies who'd been quietly watching the road for exactly this confrontation, something close to defeat. She forged nothing, Caleb said, stepping forward. She kept the truth safe when no one else would carry it. That's not a curse, Judge. That's the only honest bookkeeping this county's seen in years. The hearing that followed was neither swift nor simple, land disputes rarely are, but by week's end, the original title to Nahito's father's land had been restored to her name, the forged debt voided, and Dunmore's cooperative placed under territorial investigation, with Croft's testimony, once his own neck was on the line, filling in every gap the paper hadn't. The town's reaction was not universal grace. Some still crossed the street rather than pass her. Old words like cursed did not vanish simply because the truth had finally caught up to them. But enough had watched the hearing, enough had heard the judge's own words read aloud in the square, that the shape of the story began, slowly, to change in the town's mouth, from the cursed woman to the woman who outlasted Dunmore, which was not forgiveness, exactly, but was, Nahito thought, a beginning worth having. She did not sell her father's land. She rebuilt on it, half a mile from Caleb's ranch, close enough that the two properties' fence lines nearly touched, and closer still, some months later, when Caleb rode over one evening not to mend wire but to ask, plainly, without the softened tone he'd once avoided using on her, whether she might consider making that closeness permanent. "I don't want you to shape me into a wife the way this town shaped me into a curse," she told him, echoing his own words back at him with a small, dry smile. "I'm not asking you to be shaped," he said. "I'm asking you to build. Wren's nest in burned places first, you said. I've got a burned place. Thought you might want to see what grows there." She married him that autumn, in a ceremony that borrowed as much from her mother's traditions as from his, conducted not in the church that had once watched her be sold on its steps, but in the yard between their two properties, under a sky finally, mercifully, breaking with rain. The carved wren she wore that day, and every day after, and years later, when her daughter asked why the little bird's wings were spread as if mid-flight, Nahito would tell her the story of the auction, the debt, the paper kept safe against her skin for 2 long years, and the blacksmith who had refused to look away. "They called me cursed," she'd say, tracing the worn wood with her thumb. "Your father called me beautiful." Turned out he was the one telling the truth. Travelers passing the Marsh homestead decades later would sometimes ask about the small carved bird set into the beam above the door. Placed there, the old rancher's children explained, the year the drought finally broke, the year the town learned that curses are only ever stories men tell to avoid looking at their own failures, and that mercy, once given honestly, tends to root itself deeper than any rumor ever could.